Hello everybody, thanks for inviting me. I have the difficult task to, on the one hand, give you an insight to the Ukraine situation, at the same time to give you an insight to the situation about city development in Ukraine and how it could relate to your topics here, and perhaps also refer to what you were starting with and what your discussion here is within the setting. So I should either rather speak very fast, or you have to ask me questions afterwards of lots of topics that I cannot talk about. Just to give you the background for my work, I work for this GIZ called Deutsche Gesellschaft für internationale Zusammenarbeit. It's a German governmental organization, and we work in cooperation with the Ukrainian on the German level, German government level and Ukrainian government level, but then on the local level we work in cooperation in this project called Municipal Development Rehabilitation of the Old City of Lviv, in cooperation with the city of Lviv. And I will start the presentation with some historical background and go into the recent changes of Ukraine, and then raise a few topics that we are trying to push forward through our project locally and beyond. So just to show you how close we are related in common history, and if I say we, I speak as a German working in Ukraine and talking about Ukraine. So once it was one government, so to speak, Austrian-Hungarian time. This is Lemberg, this is Temeswar. Then it changed. Poland came back to be alive again. Lviv was Polish before Austro-Hungarian relation. Then it became, after the war, it became Soviet Union, as you know, and now Lviv is still in the same place, roughly here, and Temeswar maybe roughly there. Just as a comparison, Ukraine is a very big country, but in size maybe 2.5 times larger than Romania, in inhabitants twice as large, and if you think of the gross national product, still, let's say, a lot of potential. It has lots of, or some big cities, maybe just to raise that. Lviv is between 1 million and 500,000 inhabitants, 750,000. Lviv being in western Ukraine, Kiev, the capital, these lines mark where else we were active or working as GIZ for the German Development Cooperation. Of course, the eastern area is still in a kind of war situation, and the projects that were based here moved to Kiev. As you probably remember, there was big changes starting with November 2013, when Yanukovych decided not to continue with the association agreements. That started a protest that had been, in a way, underlying already within the population, because of continuing repression, no respect, no rule of law, and a lot of corruption. I think that was the main cases or reasons for starting not to accept it. This protest continued quite hard and long throughout the winter, and was stopped with or ended with a kind of one day where protesters were killed and the president fled. You probably remember that as well. And since then, a kind of reform process started, but at the same time, these so-called green men appeared came to Crimea, and so in parallel to this reform process, this war was initiated in the east. And within that balance, on the one hand, the country being in war, but then the war is looking from Lviv, very far away. It's much further away than we are away from Lviv. It's about 1,500 kilometers away from western Ukraine to eastern Ukraine. Then with this new government, elections were taking place. The association agreement, the beginning of the association, was signed, and now reforms are ongoing in all spheres, and tomorrow we have local elections, which is a big topic, of course. Things that have visibly changed is, for example, the police, and of course lots of money coming in from outside and supporting, coming up against the high debts that the country is in. The challenge in terms of decentralization and putting local governments now into power is very big, and especially in connecting it to urban development. Cities didn't have any power to give their planning permission even, so now new responsibilities come with a new division of responsibilities. And the high expectation of the Maidan. So on the one hand, you went into the street to change something, and so far not too much has changed or is in the middle of changing, and people demanding more participation, demanding more, let's say, control also over budgets and so on. That gives a good push, an interesting push, especially in urban development. At the same time, very little local economic development. So you will see support programs, co-financing programs, of course, on the local level work really well with local development that is highly needed. Again, looking out a little bit, this law for regional development, reform for local self-administration, and the more money being available to the local levels will be the future challenge. Just again to give you an idea, we have altogether 27 oblasts. Crimea is somewhere in between. It's counting as an oblast, but of course to some people it doesn't belong to Ukraine anymore, to others it still belongs to Ukraine. So Lviv is here. In each oblast, of course, this oblast will now also have new responsibilities. Oblast used to be very much the enlonged arm of the national level, put in with people who were placed there, who didn't have any relation to the area. Now this is slowly changing. What do we do on a very local level on urban development to spread it in this topic a little bit more? Within our project, we started an integrated urban development process for Lviv 5 years ago, which I will not go in much deeper, but it's very important, I think, for putting money into the right place, and other cities started to pick this up, especially if you get more money. Of course, you need a plan how to place it right. Then another tool, so to speak, is an annual academy through which we try to focus with different cities on topics, a little bit like you do, but mainly city administration people. What are the challenges and how do other cities deal with it? Then we also support a kind of a group that is called Can Action. They started since many years with an annual architectural event, but now this year they started a course, 3 months course for further education, because there's a big need throughout the country for people who understand, a little bit like you were starting, that there's something beyond building and architecture that one needs to talk about and understand. We call it urban management, which you also need in city administrations as a topic or as an understanding. Then we have CIM experts, which is Center for Integrated Migration. I think it's part of GIZ. We have experts that sit in Ukrainian organizations. Also, there used to be, of course, this project here in Temeshwar years ago. There was also similar topics, but also a CIM expert. And we started partnerships between cities. While I was preparing this, I was thinking that the partnership between Czernivtsi and Temeshwar could possibly also be re-alivened. I'm not talking generally about, but just really in the urban management field, because I think there's a lot of things in parallel. Talking about urban development on the national level, there is no real program that focuses on projects to support urban development. There's, of course, city budgets, but not on the national level an urban development program where you apply with a plan of projects or so. And maybe those two are interesting just to mention them. There's a fund for regional development, but with very little criteria to how one applies. And there's the so-called Ukrainian Social Investment Fund, which is actually mainly funded by the KfW and some money from the government. And it goes also into single buildings. At the moment, they change throughout a few years. At the moment, they're focusing on Eastern Ukraine, as many other donors do, of course, to rebuild or support it. Now, coming to Lviv. Lviv has 750,000 inhabitants, is an old city, and I think the main challenge is this change of belongingness throughout the last 100 years. You saw it on the map, Austrian, Hungarian, Polish, German, very short, Soviet and Ukrainian. And having gone through the war, luckily virtually undestroyed, so you have this fabric that is there, and at the same time an exchange of population. The population was 1/3 Jewish, was killed by the Germans mainly, 1/3 Polish, were sent back, or not back, but were sent west, and a few other groups. So reorganization of the city after the war. And then you have the Unesco Heritage, which of course is also a challenge to the city. The UNESCO Heritage, or the UNESCO inscribed the city with the two criterions for the artistic traditions of Eastern Europe that are still visible, architecture and artistic traditions, and for ethnic groups that lived separate yet interdependent as communities, and you still have this, let's say, handwriting of it, although you don't really have those groups anymore. The city in all is UNESCO, let's say the inner city and the Castle Mountain, and a little bit beyond is the inscription of the UNESCO area, and the buffer zone is more or less the whole city, so it's quite showing this is all areas up from the 19th century, this is older, quite similar in a way also like Temeshwar. This big red line is the area that we fixed with the city administration at the beginning of our project in 2009, where we agreed to focus on throughout the project time. Just as a comparison, I think the inner cities are quite similar. My colleague measured it out to show that it's really comparable. Nevertheless, what advantage Timișoara has these big open green spaces, at least in between the town quarters. There's much less space in Lviv, and that is also a problem for all development. Talking about the inner city, maybe the lion describes a little bit the sleeping beauty, but Lviv attracts, of course, a lot of tourists. So besides the development, how to keep a good life for citizens, and how, with the same challenge as you were describing, with the ownership situation and with very little investment and so on, and at the same time lots of tourists are coming in, so how to overlap those two topics is quite a challenge. In the beginning we did a questionnaire, and we do also an annual overview, like you were showing, about the status of the buildings, but I will not refer in detail at all to it. But in the questionnaire we asked people, do you know that the city is Unesco Heritage, part of Unesco Heritage? And they said yes, and the city should do something. You know, it's the city is this abstract object above you, not below, but of course above, and it's to do with these building marks. And we said, no, it's actually, if you think about your own life, if you think about the daily architecture, this is also why the city is part of Unesco Heritage, and this is also what matters to you as a citizen. Of course the iconic buildings matter as well, but it's not the city, it's the citizens who can do something and who are doing something, exactly as you were showing, each one doing something for themselves. But if you think about this quality, you will never gain this quality again, and if you don't actually do it now in a kind of careful way, whatever you do in the building, then it will be gone, and of course the value will be gone. And with that, we started with some co-financing programs, and in a way, one has to say the mayor in Lviv luckily has a very similar understanding. He became mayor in 2006 with an NGO called Self-Help, Samopomocz, and had the same approach, that you can't expect from the city administration everything, but you have to activate this yourself, or this group of people, depending from which standpoint you look. And there's such a potential if once you actually support them in the right way, or once you support yourself in the right way, that the city will stand up again. We started with door and window program, door being the entrance that concerns everybody in a way. Again, coming to that picture that you showed, left and right, people had done it nicely, but in between, this common space doesn't belong to anybody. It's the same in Lviv, but the door is used by everybody, so we started with a co-financing program with those doors as being the identification for every citizen in each building. This is just a brief overview about our project topics, which, as I said, I will not refer to much in detail, but we work with the city administration to restructure a little bit, like with the co-financing programs, restructure urban renewal in the administration. We have lots of activities running with all. We is always the city administration and support by the GIZ. We have a lot of training for local craftsmen, but also other disciplines, and we try to share it into other parts of Ukraine. Just to give you an idea, this building stands, let's say, for a very nice part of generally time of the city, lots of secession, and we call this Hutzul secession. Hutzul is the people who live in the Carpathian Mountains, because it has this interesting design. And there are big areas maybe not all as nice as this, but big areas that are still built out of that time. And then in the inner city you have buildings that have Gothic basements, then later buildings, Renaissance buildings, and facades that were redone partly in the 19th century. And so coming back to this program, we really started to catch people on the areas that belong to everybody, these areas that belong to nobody and everybody. But to overcome this gap, that there is no clear ownership in those parts and no clear responsibility, and of course in the long run no way of maintaining the building. But because there is no real law to support general house owner groups or to support the development of house owner groups, we started in 2010 with these small programs to initiate groups with one small or two small projects to start developing a feeling of commonness. And as I said, we started with the entrance doors because that's the most commonness you can get in a house, because that's the place where everybody identifies themselves with. And we share the costs with citizens and also with the city of Lviv. So in short, the city of Lviv can also put money into private housing. And we started here, you might have noticed this, with also with the city of Lviv, but had to change it because for repairing a door one needed a whole facade elevation permission. The permission is given in Kiev, so a procedure by which time, of course, you are overtaken by many other people who have bought some, let's say, Chinese metal door to quickly have some improvement. So we, in that case, decided that we wouldn't have this share of the city anymore, of the public money, but just a share between this project and the citizens, and it also works. Of course, this is kind of nominal share for the citizens, but in general, I think it's really the idea that you share costs in order to have responsibility and ownership. And it, of course, immediately produces an identification with what is happening. It produces also a participation, because people actually have to sign a contract with the city and the craftsmen. They automatically follow what is happening to their money and whether it's done right and so on. And of course it starts a conversation within the building. Often people have not talked to their neighbors before. And with a small topic like this, it's not a lifelong topic, it's an overviewable time. And it's a project that can bring a kind of success feeling also within this group, and then perhaps prepare for bigger projects. So this is all depending on people applying for it. It's not a program that is handed down from the city administration, but it's to each topic people have to apply for improvement, which of course doesn't necessarily mean that it's always the most important objects that are applied for, but sometimes it's rather normal objects. But we were really focusing on people's activities so that they continue further after that. And the effect is that people, maybe quickly to this process, of course courtyards is also very important as a common livelihood situation, and we go with them through a process of developing ideas, which is also not only whoever is involved in it, but also for young architects or landscape architects who really learn this experience how to deal with groups, because that will be in the long run a big topic also here, I guess, with house owner groups, how to steer them in productive directions, how to moderate and how to come really to results. And from those topics, of course, people then start talking about their building, start talking about their staircases, infrastructure, and so on. So a lot of these little projects have follow-ups, maybe without us, maybe with us, but because you have already a conversation running. Also, staircases are a big topic for improvement, and we can only raise these topics as examples in the project, but we have imitators and followers who not only as people who have money come and say, you know, who do you have as craftsmen that you can recommend, and we don't have them, but who did you work with that you can recommend, which I think is the best, that people, of course, in the city there are not only people who have no money, but there are also people who have money, and if they get interested in specialized work or craftsmen, then they become again the best people as forerunners for being copied again. And besides this life quality and the ownership, of course we have also the effect that it's to an outside nice for people who are coming as investors or as tourists. And of course it builds up this local economy, as I was saying. And if you see the city when you come and visit, then you would see how much a local craftsmanship is needed to maintain all this that has been built 100 years ago or older. And not to underestimate, of course, it improves very much the image of the city administration that is flexible, reliable, supportive, talks with citizens, and is predictable. And this is not underestimatable, if one can say so, because I experienced it a few times that we would have signed documents for doing a courtyard or so, and people would still not believe. There's such a long history of distrust or mistrust or not happening, that people just don't think it's true if they actually put their money in, and if other people put their money in, or if they actually agreed on something that this will happen. And for that, I think it's also good for people to experience these small projects. It's not a lifelong topic, and we now have to renovate our house together, and how the hell do we do it? But it's really incremental steps that goes towards a bigger topic. Changing subject, another topic is architectural competitions that we started in 2010 and 2012 with, which we see very much as also as a professionalization for the city administration, but also, of course, as a discussion for sites and locations. Even before you start with this competition, you have pre-meetings to identify and define what matters actually on the site. And of course it's a way for young architects, be it national or international, to show and to participate, to experience or exercise. And it was interesting also, it started Lviv to be internationally discussed or internationally shown. And I will only refer to one of the competitions, and we did the first competition about 3 places of Jewish history in Lviv, 3 sites, and I will only refer to this site now in the following. We started with a workshop with people from the area, from the neighborhood, but also people who relate to the topic of Jewish history and further knowledge. In that workshop we did also a quarter walk and discussion, you can see it here on the top, of what would you tell the architect, the unknown architect, what is important for this location as a neighbor or as a citizen who lives there or works there. And it changed, it was an interesting process because it started a discussion, of course, in general, and started this topic to be continuously discussed or raised. And so once you have a competition running, you actually have a conversation running. Then, of course, with a jury, it's also an interesting process. Who do you need as a jury for a competition like this? So on the one hand, you need people who have an overview about the local situation, what is needed. At the same time, you need people who have an idea of how to run competitions professionally, how to run this process professionally. At the same time, you need clear understanding of the topic, and you need people who represent groups. And surprisingly enough, it had this overwhelming, how do you call it, answer, also responding from all over the world, which was interesting for us to see, because I think even the mayor didn't dream ever to get people interested from so far away to focus on a city, maybe really that they never thought about before. Also, we prepared the jury with a professional, let's say, booklet, because having so many projects, you need also a kind of way to summarize the ideas that people actually don't get lost because the jury walks past it, don't like it or so. But so we had somebody describing each project just with the idea, with no judgment, with no, and I like it or it's good or not, but just to introduce the jury into the topics. So briefly to this one place about two synagogues that were destroyed by the German Nazis in 41 and 43, and this was the site of the former Great City Synagogue. This was the site of the Golden Rose. Today this is a public space, and this is a ruin. This competition took place in 2010, and it continued for very long to be a big discussion whether one can do improvement or not. And the result of the competition was at the time actually by a German, although it was anonymous participation. A young German landscape architect who won this design, or who won this competition, and he suggested to keep this square of the former Great City Synagogue rather empty, with this feeling of emptiness, to have a site which was a Bet HaMidrash, which is also destroyed and empty today, only underground, some foundations. A site of contemplation and relaxing, and this Golden Rose ruins, independently of his result, is to be conserved. So in 2010 that was the competition. We worked for a long time on it, had long discussions, and it developed much further. With a little, let's say, art object which is called perpetuation, and describes more emotions and moments of people who have lived in Lviv in writing, which is this thing here, and will be here. And now we are in the midst of realization with two different projects. One is this conservation project, and this one here is a very modern language, so it's a very modern public space, of course, as well. And I heard that you also had a discussion, I think 2 days ago, or yesterday as well, about monuments in the city and public space and monuments in the city. And in Lviv, there's the same discussion, rather, let's say, backwards-looking monuments of people out of bronze are put up in oversized scale, where the public, should relate and look up to. And our place here will open up a other feeling, perhaps, where you feel within that space, and because it will stand out in the material, that there's something different, and you feel like a normal human being, and you can reflect with the help of these texts on this perpetuation, and with a few other informations, and beyond that also educational programs, but it's not the language of somebody up there and me down here. And just to pick one out, this art object, or this perpetuation object, is rather interesting because it has 21 texts from different times throughout the time throughout the time of Lviv, of people who lived in Lviv or in that area, and they catch moments how they lived there. The texts were collected again through the world, locally, but also from Israel, from America, from other places, and put together always in the original text and translations. And that project alone compiled probably 50 or 80 people who contributed towards it. So again, it's a very interesting process to see how it works. This is the site at the moment. There was some, from the 1980s, some, I don't know when it was destroyed, but destroyed leftovers for this site, actually quite similar in the idea. Now at the moment we're removing this and rebuilding, or not rebuilding, but building this object. And later on I will show you, I have some brochures with me, maybe just one step back. We are also started talking of finance. It's coming out of the city budget and also out of the partly out of the project's budget, but there's still some money missing, and we started now a crowdfunding for this missing money, and I have some brochures with me where you can see where to find it. The address is called Jewish Lviv Travel, and really again with the idea, maybe we could find money from one person, but with the idea to have people to join in and to talk about it. All these topics would not be so easy. They're still not easy, but would not be so possible without training of people, because even for open space and topics like this, you need good craftsmen, or you need good building companies, which is probably different here. I'm sure it's already much further, but in Lviv it's still a big topic. So we, since 6 years, we train intensively people in different topics and building companies in different topics. We also do sample projects, again, rather separate, pointed out, but this is like mixed of training and realization. All trainings are done on real objects. And of course, this building site was up here, rather difficult building site for a few months. And it was also started by a group of people that were actually IT experts parking their car here, and something fell down and they started to raise this topic, which I think is, again, an interesting topic that other people, other groups join in to raise a topic where heritage matters. This is another object on the market square which could not be saved as original but was replaced. So all kinds of different challenges are done within training or within the craftsmen that we trained as jobs. Maybe this is an exception in the sense it's typical within our work. We advise also or support people. This is owned by two owners, actually the ground floor owned by a local oligarch, the upper two floors owned by somebody else with money, and of course they don't necessarily talk with each other, but they have an interest to have advice and to get something out that becomes one object, or is one object, but is actually done in one piece. And I think that's, again, yeah, they are people with money, but at the same time it's also a process how to combine different kinds of owners. And on the right side we did this facade because we put so much effort into private people's building and the awareness of private people and so on, that at the same time the city realized we have to show that we are doing it as well. So renovating in a big school, all the windows in the original windows, not exchanging but renovating it, and being an example, of course, in schools, as you probably know yourself, it's a good example that children take home. What happens in school, they talk at home about it. And so the city itself also puts money into the same topic to show what we expect of you, we're doing ourselves. In parallel, we also put up a program in school. We renewed an educational program for carpenters so that the focus is more onto renovation. Another topic in the training is management of trees and public space. That, of course, started with a big discussion of public space and maybe further the awareness of climate and so on, but starting with building work, street building work, and cutting the trees because of the street building work. And so it's a kind of circle, as I'm sure you also know about. So we trained building companies that are working on behalf of the city administration how to cut trees, because in the long run it's a cost factor, of course, how you cut trees if they either then decay and fall onto cars and so on, or if they are fully cut, it has an effect on the city budget and also on the climate or on the city itself if there is no tree anymore. So we developed, just as a sample, but the city developed it further for some area, a tree management plan to see in what situation the trees are, in what condition the trees are, and then in the long run to have an overview, how much money do you have to put in. So if there's an area with lots of red dots, or lots of broken trees, of course it means for the future budget also investment. Then another topic which becomes more and more necessary or interesting, I think, for people. There are lots of people who are rather active and who, as I said, with the Maidan effect, also see that they want to change things, and the need to moderate between city administration and citizens, or amongst citizens as a group, develops to be more important. So we offer some training for this moderation, but within the topic of urban development. And the last point about how to, let's say, spread all those topics that I was talking about and many more, we developed a format called Maistania Mr. Citizens Workshop, or Urban Workshop, which is this pavilion that we put up every year on a different location. We started very much with the idea to make heritage more touchable or tangible, and then slowly, especially now in the last 2 years, many organizations started to join, or young groups of sort of organizations, but active groups started to join, and it became a platform really for public discussion about many different topics. And if you're interested, it's lots of topics and films are under Majstania Mista. Also, if you give it in Latin, you can find it. So through this Majstania Mista, we also promote small projects. Again, for example, some art painting somewhere a little bit on the side, not on the main square, but to have people participating more. And of course we use it also for topics with bicycles. One of the main topics, pedestrian areas, the whole inner city is pedestrianized since 3 years or 2 years, more or less in one overnight action. And now we're preparing this bicycle topic more and more. Another format which might be interesting for you is the so-called urban cafe, which is only peripheral to do with our project, but it started as a discussion, as a format, because we felt that there's more places needed like this event, but on a kind of weekly or monthly situation where people can just discuss topics in the public. And this is the head of Department for Architecture, and you might know this person. He used to work here for some years. And it's really involving different kinds of groups. Sometimes it's rather specialist groups, sometimes it's this interacting between city administration and some architects or some general groups. Also, we started with that format on the Majstania Mista, that we would always have departments of the city presenting and discussing their topics. So the infrastructure department would go to the Majstania Mista, and first it was like, what should we do here? What should we say? But then it slowly became a kind of normal topic that one does that one has this point of interaction with citizens. Then another topic is the Heritage Days, which of course, I don't know whether you have Heritage Days here. It's in Germany rather common to have 2 days every year to a certain topic. We started that, don't know whether it says somewhere, since 2011, and also developed further mindsets that it's not only about public buildings, but it's also about private buildings you enter, or about your own space that you can show, so that this idea of value matters, or of identity matters. Now I'm coming to the end. This is our project website, and if you don't get any of the brochures that I brought with, we have all of it, most of the documentation on this website. Thank you.